Hey everyone, I am going to look at another limit hold'em hand that I played in the casino recently, and in this hand is a very common dynamic of button versus big blind in a single raise pot. I wanted to take a look at this hand because I had a very good hand in this situation. The hand starts out with the button raising and me defending in the big blind with 4-3 offsuit. The flop comes 8-3-3 with two spades, and obviously a very good flop for my hand. I flop trips, and we check, and villain has a range bet on this flop effectively. We do fold some 3x in the big blind pre-flop, so he has a bit of a range advantage on this texture, and also these sims do assume that I have some 3-betting pre-flop, so he should have a pretty solid range advantage here. So he goes ahead and bets, and then we see a very familiar and somewhat common pattern in Pile Solver. We are doing a ton of raising on this flop and a ton of, not a ton, but a decent amount of folding and very little calling, relatively speaking, only 25% calling on the flop. We can see that we're basically fast playing all of our good hands here. If you look at the 8 row, the 8x row, as well as the 3x row, we are primarily raising all these hands for value, along with a bunch of other combos that are semi-bluffs, bluffs, weird thin value, like some random king-jack offsuit, for example, to have board coverage. In game, I knew that I was going to fast play this flop a lot, but I did think that I should have some slow plays from some of my trips, and I decided to randomize for it and rolled a 40 out of 100, which for me at the time seemed low enough to go for a slow play with 4-3. It turns out, looking at this, that that was more or less foolhardy of me. That really is not a valid strategy, and there is an interesting pattern, though, to notice from the slow play line here. Look at what happens with our trips. The only version of trips that really wants the slow play, outside of the quads that apparently just has the board so dead, you want to induce some things from maybe an 8x on the turn, is King 3 offsuit, is the one combo that does a decent amount of slow playing out of the 3x hands, and King 3 suited, same thing. Why is this? Well, this is a dynamic I notice in Solverland and GTO land that we don't really see in live play from the mid-stakes level of play, which is you want to construct your strategy around the idea of targeting the button's king highs in this spot. It's not really that important what villain on the button is going to do with ace highs in this spot. In fact, we think ace high is going to basically continue and maybe put in more action no matter what we do. But the king highs are very interesting because look what happens if we slow play. Let's say we do just check and call, and the turn is the ace like it was in game, and we check again. Notice that villain is betting with vet for value with every ace x, and most of his checks are coming from king x, in fact, and king king. So when we hold king 3 and we block a king, then we don't expect villain to have as many checks on the turn, and therefore it probably makes a better slow play candidate on the flop. We expect villain to bet more frequently on the turn when we hold a king in our hand. Notice again what happens even when the turn is like a deuce instead of an ace. We check, and villain is still betting for value with basically all of his ace highs. Very little checking coming from ace high, but a lot of checking coming from king high. Some queen high, but a lot of king high. So when we decide to slow play, we like having the king in our hand because it reduces the chance that villain is going to check back the turn, and this is going to make our slow play more successful. And then you see the king 3 combos, of which we have a decent number, going ahead and springing their trap on this turn. Let's go back to the way the hand actually played out and focus on that for a moment, which was me making an ill-advised slow play and the turn coming in ace. Obviously, we check here again, and we do notice that villain does just get to keep barreling on this card at a high frequency. Notice that villain is even betting for value with hands as weak as king 10 off. This is value, guys. He's expecting to get called by worse hands, like worse king x, and obviously he's going to face some tough decisions when he gets check raised by ace x, and we can see immediately those hands become kind of 0 EV folds, but, he doesn't get check raised all that often. He's very protected because of all the ace x in his range, plus the actual, very good hands that he has once in a while. So villain just really has no problem going ahead and betting to protect his hand from flush draws, things like that. We do notice also when villain bets the turn, we kind of now have already fast played, already check raised the flop with most of our flush draws, but the remainder of our flush draws are going for it here, considering all the ace x hands that we have to protect. Notice that we're not check raising any 8x if we didn't fast play it on the flop, although we barely have any 8x. Again, the most likely combo for an 8x is the king 8, which doesn't see a lot of as much incentive as the other 8x combos on the flop to check raise, considering it's blocking the king high that it's hoping to get called down by. I think I've made that point clearly here. Actually, in game, what happened is the board went check check on the turn. river was an offsuit 9, and now we see that I all of a sudden get to bet 53% of the time. If we look at an equity situation, we see that we're a small favorite here, 51% total range versus range equity. And we do have more of the nut advantage in this situation, right? Villain was going to bet all of his ace X on the turn. So at this point, a nut advantage is literally as good as like an ace, right? We have all of these ace highs that are now top pair that are basically the nuts. Villain doesn't have any of that. So we also go for a lot of thin mergy value with some king highs, betting down to king 10 off. King 8 and king 9 are pairs, so those are kind of no-brainers. And then a bunch of bluffs that peeled the flop. We have some Jack X. We have some even worse hands like I don't know, 7-5 suited. Just kind of barreling. All our pairs are betting for value, so you can see we're just going to bet this spot for pretty thin value. And our checking range is kind of capped, but a little bit poor because we're throwing in some slow plays. King 3, again, checking the river. Kind of an interesting combo to choose. Some ace X mixing some river checks. If we do check the river, villain has kind of a really weird capped range situation where he has basically no top pairs, but he does have some pocket pairs that played passively on the turn. He hits the 9 on the river sometimes. He has some 8x that checked back on the turn when the ace came and didn't feel as incentivized to bet. So when villain bets the river, we have a very interesting kind of river strategy where we mostly just fold because we have nothing, but every now and then we throw in a check raise because we have all these nuts that we feel like any ace X is the nuts at this point. We have those trips that went for it, that went for the delay, and then we throw in some random bluffs. 10-4 suited, that's not much of a combo. Very little of any of these, right? But, we're trying to find slivers of bluffs here. Queen deuce of diamonds, because we do have this nut advantage here. In reality, I actually led the river, and we can see that villain strategy is pretty straightforward here. He's just in like a 0 EV spot. He doesn't really have any good hands. Obviously, he's snap calling with all the pairs, because those can beat my thin value. He can beat my king highs here. But his king highs are more or less indifferent right away. If we look at the EVs, all of his king highs are very close to 0 EV. So he just kind of has to make a decision based on removal or based on a player read, something like that. The reason, though, I found this hand interesting is to think about in a button versus big blind situation, it might not be immediately apparent that the most important thing to focus on is this wide swath of hands that are in both ranges, but primarily in the buttons range of all these king high hands. I feel like a decent limit hold'em player is often thinking about his opponent having ace high, but a solver is a little more optimistic than that. In these wide range situations, the solver is more or less taking it for granted that ace high is going to be pretty sticky and stubborn in a lot of boards, and it's starting to think about the next tier of hands, which are like making the king high hands indifferent, or thinking about how a king in one's hand might affect your strategy. So maybe you'll find that interesting. I certainly did. I don't think I played this hand particularly well. Villain did call the river and I won. I don't know what he had. I think that because of the live pro nature of a mixed game, he probably had a hand that was a little better than he should have on the turn, and it's possible he even had an ace X, and I kind of screwed this hand up and could have even maybe won an extra bet on the river with a check raise. But that's kind of neither here nor there. I really screwed up this hand on the flop. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts are and your questions about this kind of interesting situation. Another a wide range spot with a board texture that really favors the big blind playing an aggressive strategy, and some interesting dynamics that result from that. I'll see you in the comments. Stay tuned for some more limit hold'em hands in the future, and talk to you guys soon. See ya.